So I'm going to read some more of antique fairy tales. I think there's only like two more stories in this book, and then I'll be done with it. Okay. So this one's called The One-Footed Fairy. There was once a fairy who sat down while the others were dancing. His name was Tippitin, and he was a very happy fairy, though he never seemed to know any of the things the other fairies knew. Some fairies know how to paint flowers, and they always do it by night when nobody is looking. One has a tube of blue paint, and he squeezes it on the larkspurs, and another has a tube of red paint, and he splashes it over the roses. The cleverest ones of all know how to paint spots on the tiger lilies and streaks on the sweet williams, and the very clever ones indeed can touch up any pansy's face so that you could hardly think it was painted at all. You'd say it just grew so. These clever ones that have the streaky spotty work to do often use little brushes made out of the fur of cat's tail. One hair is enough for a fine brush, and two at the most for a very heavy one, but the cats hate to have them pulled out. The fairies are very cautious about doing it when no one knows, so they always take the time when a cat is crying for something else. If a cat gets her foot stepped on, or even if she is just waiting outside the door to be let in and cries to mention it, a dozen or two fairies are always waiting to pounce on her and pull out as many tail hairs as they can before the meow is finished, so that although you can't see them, you may be very sure every cat is followed by at least 24 fairy merchants, waiting to pull hairs from her tail and sell them to the fairy painters. I forgot to say that only the hairs from the tails of red and pink cats will do at all, so it will be of no use to make everyday cats cry to help the fairies. Only the red and pink ones will do. But Tippitin did not know how to paint flowers. Get some tea. Then some of the fairies know how to make round clear drops that you can see through. They make them out of icicles, but Tippitin did not know that. Some fairies know how to make beautiful bicycle wheels out of nice round spiders' webs when they find them, but Tippitin did not know that. Some fairies can sweep up the kitchen for you if they like you, or make the butter come very fast, or keep it from coming at all. But Tippitin did not know how to do that. He only knew how to dance. And one night, when all the other fairies in that province of the kingdom were dancing, he did not dance at all. He just sat down on a pebble and drew a big leaf up over his knees. The fairies were dancing very hard that night because they were practicing for a big circle dance that would be held the next night, which was the night of the full moon, and the queen was coming. She had been in Lapland for 7 nights, which is a very long time when you are a fairy, and she was coming back to tell her people what she saw. She really went up there to see if the patterns of snow crystals were any different from the patterns all over the rest of the world, and if they were, to bring some home. The fairies were wild to know that. Some fairies can sneeze. So some fairies can freeze snow crystals, but Tippitin couldn't do that. When they were dancing, they found that there was a gap in the ring, and they all stopped short. They knew at once how it was. Some fairy was not there. "Why, it's Tippitin," said one, and this was the night when they all said things together. It is the night before the night of the full moon. They all cried, "Why, it's Tippitin." "Tippitin, where are you?" called one, And then all the others all cried, "Tibetan, where are you?" Tibetan only drew up the leaf a little higher over his knees. "Oh," he said gruffly, "I'm here. Don't you see me?" "He's here," said all the fairies. "Don't we see him?" They crowded up all about him and climbed on the leaves over his head and looked down at him, but Tibetan only tucked the leaf in round his knees. "Why don't you dance with us, Tibetan?" they asked him. Tibetan put out his lips, and it felt very big, and drew up his shoulders to his ears, as if he needn't answer at all if he didn't want to. "Oh," said he, "I'm not dancing tonight." "Oh," said the fairies, "he's not dancing tonight." Then they looked at one another and wondered what they could say next, for it is very serious for a fairy to say he won't dance. It is exactly as if a boy or girl should say, "I won't learn 2 times 2, or catch." But they were all thinking the same thing, and in a minute they all said it. "But Tibetan, you have to dance, for this is the new circle dance. If you don't learn it tonight, you won't know it, and if you don't know it, you can't dance tomorrow night, when the queen is here. And what will you do then, Tibetan?" "Nothing," said Tibetan. The fairies looked at one another, and their eyes grew very large, and their mouths grew round. "Nothing," they all said. "Tibetan will do nothing. That is what Tibetan will do, nothing." Tibetan twisted up his face and squirmed about on the pebble. "You go away," said he, "and let me alone. I shan't dance tonight, and I shan't dance tomorrow night." "But what will the queen say?" they all cried. "I don't know," said Tibetan. Then they all looked at one another and said, "He doesn't know," and they were silent for a long time. But after that very long time was over, they suddenly thought they must go and look at the queen's throne and see if it was all right and tight for her to use. Now a great many things will do for a queen's throne: a tuft of moss, or an opening rose, or a clover head. Well, there are a great many things, but in this particular province there was one tiny piece of bark that the queen had taken a great liking to for a throne. The little boars in the wood had carved it beautifully for her, so that there was of a wonderful pattern, and it had fallen from a tree in exactly the right position, so that it was tilted up a little for the foreback and tilted sidewise a little for the arms. The queen had said she never saw anywhere such a comfortable throne, and she believed she would find it so if she lived to be 10,000,010. And then the fairies all laughed until the owls brought their 2 yellow lanterns to see what was the matter. For everybody knows fairies never live to be 10,000,010. They only live forever. That was a great joke of the queen's, and it was repeated everywhere all over the kingdom, and is being repeated now. Or it will be tonight, if the moon is full. Now somebody had discovered, not long before this night, when they were making ready for the queen, that her throne seemed a little unsteady. A rabbit running through the wood may have joggled it, or some mortal walking that way may have hit it with his foot, not knowing how important it was to let it alone. And really it is surprising that mortals know so very little about what is against the law of the woods. In the woods, there are ever so many things you can do if you stop and take off your cap and say, "By your leave," or even make a bow. But there is one thing that must never be done: things that are good wood citizens, like ladies' slippers, or fern, or anything that blooms red, pink, blue, white, or yellow, must never be pulled up by the roots. Sometimes you may take them up very carefully and carry them to live somewhere else, but you must be perfectly sure you know beforehand that you are going to put them in the same kind of place that they are used to living in, and they are going to get water enough to drink. There are very dreadful punishments for people who pull up things that bloom red or pink or blue or white or yellow and throw them down and leave them to die. I will not tell you what the punishment is. If you want to find out, you can look in the fairy code. But tonight, when the fairies went to look at the queen's throne, they found it was as firm and solid as a throne could be. They pushed at it and pulled at it. Of course they dared not sit in it, and they all breathed a great breath and said, "Well, that's all right," and they trooped away and began dancing again. But Tippitin still sat with the leaf over his knees, and he would not dance. The next night, at exactly 12 o'clock, the owls began to call, "Who? Who?" And all the fairies answered, "Her Majesty, her most lovely, dear, and glorious, splendid Majesty, the Queen." And then all the woods waked up, and even the little grasshopper and cricket things in fields beyond the woods got out their musical instruments and piped and piped. And the farmhouse dog called out, "Something's up, hark, hark." But as he said it, he went into his kennel just as far as he could, and sat there with his tail tucked under him. For every dog knows what is going on in the woods at night, and that he'd better say as little about it as possible. The Queen had come straight through from Lapland by the Crystal Express, and her chariot had not yet melted. It was the most beautiful carved ice you ever saw, and the canopy over it was the loveliest spun frost. It was drawn by 6 northern lights, but they had to be unharnessed at once so that they could go back, because they were needed to make an illumination for a Labor Night parade of the frosts and snows. The Queen had hired them on that condition, so when they unharnessed themselves and flashed off, she nodded at them very kindly, and then she turned to her own people and told them to stand where they were and see her chariot melt. It was a little surprise she had arranged for them, because it is very unusual to see an ice chariot in the woods on a warm summer night. This night it was very warm indeed, and the chariot melted fast, but quickly as it went, a great many fairy artists stood by to draw the forms of the snow crystals to see if they could copy them next winter, if they really got a great many ideas. And they really got a great many ideas. And when the chariot and the canopy were quite gone, and there was only a tiny puddle of water left where they had been, the Queen turned to her subjects and said, "Now to the dance."